Hello, crows and corvids. My name is TB Sky, and I am back from my little mini holiday to celebrate my birthday and my dad's birthday and my cousin's birthday. My family likes to get it on in the winter, what can I say? Anyway, I'm back, and good lord, there's a whole lot of stuff to catch up on. Now, you might be hearing some car noise and stuff from outside over the course of this video because I've got my window open, because hell no, I am not closing it right now. The world is very slowly being cooked in the fat of climate change, and I have a fan just pointed directly at me at all times just to stay alive right now. So, Fiddlesticks and Volibear. They are on course for a visual and gameplay update each. Like, they're going to be updated into fully modern League of Legends champions with all the bells and whistles that entails. And here is a little bit of a dev update letting us know where the process of the two characters is at. So I thought, well, let's have a little bit of a discussion about that. Let's talk about where Riot seems to be going with the characters, what we think about that, more specifically what I think about that, and then you can tell me what you think about that in the comments. You know, you comment, like, subscribe, YouTube things, and yeah, that'll be the first video, and then we'll get into the Pantheon stuff. Good lord, there's so much Pantheon stuff. So, according to the post, Fiddlesticks has made it out of early ideation, which is to say that they feel like they have locked down, okay, this is what we want the character to look like, here's how we want him to play, now it's time to put him into actual production. That doesn't mean that they have settled on all the details about the champion. Like, everything can still change once the character is in production. This is something that I do respect about Riot's particular design process, is that they are willing, if something isn't working, if something is bad, if work doesn't do the thing they're supposed to do, they're willing to icebox it, they're willing to put it on ice, they're willing to start over from scratch if they have to. So I just want to temper expectations here to say that even though Fiddlesticks is slowly coming into production, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be coming soon. Things can still go wrong. Volibear is not through ideation yet. They still seem to be a little bit uncertain about exactly what they want to do with him, but he's pretty close to production, at least according to the post as it is. So let's start by talking about Fiddlesticks. Now, according to Blake Squad 5 Smith at Riot, when approaching Fiddlesticks, we wanted to focus on highlighting the identity that Fiddlesticks already had, a teamfight winning ambush mage. Crowstorm is such an iconic spell that we wanted to have the rest of the kit support what that ability tells Fiddle to do. That pushed us towards the idea of Fiddle being one of, if not the best, ambush character in League. And what's interesting to me about that is that Fiddlesticks was never really designed to be an ambush champion. Well, I mean, don't want to say in terms of gameplay, because in terms of gameplay, the Crowstorm is absolutely amazing for ambushing, and I can't help but imagine that that must have been part of the consideration when they were designing him in the beginning. But as a character design, as an aspect of League of Legends in terms of the lore and the story and the visuals, he was never really designed to be an ambush champion. If you remember from my What's the Deal with Fiddlesticks video, there's going to be a link to that up in a card up in the corner if you want to watch that one. Back in Fiddlesticks' early original lore, he was essentially a kind of magical accident. There was this summoner who was really good at summoning, but he got overconfident one day and summoned too hard, and when the rest of the Institute of War came in to say, hey, dude, you've been summoning too hard in here, what's happened? Oh my god! Fiddlesticks was there, and the summoner was gone. So he's a sort of magical accident that happened, and Fiddlesticks just killed everybody who got close to him. So the summoners of the Institute of War, humanists that they are, said, okay, well, this guy kills everything that comes close to him, let's just use him as an executioner. So they just, like, whenever they had like a criminal they needed to get rid of, they just like, go see Fiddlesticks for a second for us. Like, that dealt with the problem, I guess. Well, it's just salt of the earth, those people. And then also, of course, they decided to use him as a champion on the fields of justice because these people were sociopaths. Then the 2014 lore retcon hits, and no, Fiddlesticks doesn't have that anymore. And they sort of kind of tried to retcon him into being this demon character. And there's a really good Fiddlesticks short story with the name of which I can't remember, but which basically describes how Fiddlesticks is in the current state of the lore is supposed to operate in the world, where he occupies a field. Like a field in terms of like a field that you grow a harvest in, a field that's full of crows, and then that one single scarecrow that's standing there. And if you cross his field, he gets mad and he comes after you and he destroys you. And the story describes how some bandits have stolen some stuff and done some bad stuff, and then in the process of getting back to their cave, they cross over Fiddlesticks' field, and then he decides to hunt them down and murder them because he is this kind of folkloric rural demon. Rural is one of the worst words that you can say if you're not a native English speaker. It's a Scooby-Doo word. It's like, rural? Robbie, rural. Like, I hate it, but we're gonna have to say it a few times. He's this rural demonic horror thing, like the kind of demon that would be thought up by the children who live in some faraway farming village, and there's child murder on the loose, and everybody starts a rumor that it's the Scarecrow killing the kids. Like, that's a setup for a really good horror movie in that particular vein, and that's kind of important. Anyway, Fiddlesticks developed his identity as the prime ambusher of League of Legends mostly because of Crowstorm, because Crowstorm is, well, it's kind of the only interesting thing that Fiddlesticks does in terms of his ability. Like, what does he have? He has like that bounce thing that causes fear, and he has a tether that literally looks like any other tether in the entire goddamn game, and then he has, I can't even remember what his third ability is. It's so unmemorable. Crowstorm is really the only thing you remember about him, and so that, I think, in the minds of players became the source of Fiddlesticks' identity as an ambush champion. And that, to me, is just really interesting. Like, that's how design can kind of grow organically on its own. He sort of attained this identity of an ambush champion just by sheer virtue of that being the thing that he's good off at in-game, but his visual design never actually really supported that. Like, think of what Fiddlesticks looks like in League of Legends. He's like this horrifying scarecrow demon with a giant scythe who's like jumps around like doing, doing, doing on the field, right? Not exactly like, oh yeah, that's an ambush champ, that's a subtle guy who hides in the shadows and jumps up. No, he's really flamboyant, he's really open, he's really visually obvious. So it's really interesting to me that the gameplay of Fiddlesticks kind of overrode the visual design of Fiddlesticks in terms of the identity that people think of as being Fiddlesticks' identity. And that's the thing, like, the scythe is not really an ambush weapon. Like, it's not really a weapon for hiding in the shadows and being secretive and jumping out just at the right moment to deliver an instant attack. When you think of an ambush, like an assassination or something like that, you think of wrist blades, like in Assassin's Creed, you think of knives, you think of small, fast weapons, shurikens, kunai, that kind of stuff that can be deployed quickly and stealthily. A scythe, isn't really that. It's not really subtle stuff that he's got going on here. It's not stuff you're gonna miss if he walks past you in a crowd, right? And one good decision about Fiddlesticks that I remember Riot made was when, as Fiddlesticks' identity as an ambush champion sort of solidified, a really cool piece of tech that they added to him was that if you move around in game and then stand still for a bit, he will stop having an idle animation. That is, like, he will stop moving at all and stands completely still like a real scarecrow. And I thought that was such a cool thing to do. And to me, like, and this is just like a gameplay idea I had that I'm not a gameplay designer. I'm an artist, a visual designer. Please don't listen to me. But the gameplay that visual idea kind of lent itself to is, okay, so what if we take Fiddlesticks as a scarecrow seriously, right? He literally is a scarecrow. So he stands still for long enough, and then he just stands completely still and looks like a scarecrow, and nobody pays any attention to him. Surely that could be part of his gameplay. Like, if you start the game with Fiddlesticks in the game, scarecrows are going to be randomly scattered all over Summoner's Rift. Just random scarecrows, completely harmless, you can't target them, they can't do anything. And if Fiddlesticks stands still long enough, his model shifts. He changes model to look like just a completely ordinary, harmless scarecrow. And then the game of cat and mouse, the ambush game, would be if you have to remember where the scarecrows are on the map. You have to tell your teammates, hey, there's a scarecrow here, here, and here. So if you see one there, they're not dangerous. And Fiddlesticks' game is figuring out a way to fool his opponents into thinking he's just a normal scarecrow, to get close, to get the Crowstorm. Like, that to me seemed like an obvious way to go with that would be thematically really cool for the idea of Fiddlesticks being just a completely ordinary scarecrow who all of a sudden springs to life and murders you in a horrible way. That would be interesting. And I bring that up partly because that really doesn't seem to be the way that this concept art is going. Now, I want to stress, this is concept art that we have seen before. Specifically, you might recognize, like, this guy here from A on this particular sheet, and you can see this guy here is an iteration on the idea at play with this guy, and the same thing with the cage guy. He seems to be an iteration on this idea down here. So this is an iteration that we're seeing on some concept art that we've already seen, and these are not really reflective of the final design of Fiddlesticks. Like these are artists just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. But there's a tendency I have identified in this concept art that I would be a little bit disappointed if that made its way into the final product, because these Fiddlestickses are all mechanical. All of them. Like, all of they're all sort of made of metal. They've all got all these mechanical bits and spikes and joints, and it's really, you can see it here. Like, this Fiddlesticks isn't a scarecrow cobbled together from bits of wood with sackcloth and straw kind of stuffed onto it to make it look vaguely like a person. This Fiddlesticks is... well, it's a robot, basically. It's a little machine. It's got these leg joints. It's got these, I don't know if they're cables or what they're supposed to be, but it's got leg joints. It's got, screws and, metal going on. And that seems consistent across all of the design that they're showing us here. So either that's the artist who's working on them, who just kind of has a thing for metal design, which is a really, that's a really good horror aesthetic. I don't want to take anything away from that metal design, like this creaky metal doll that kind of squeaks as it moves and stuff. That's really cool for horror, but it doesn't fit really well with the idea of rural, I hate that word, rural Fiddlesticks as being part of the identity that he used to have. This, to me, seems more like if you wanted to make this into something that's related to farms and farming, it would be something like he was a harvesting machine that got possessed by an evil spirit and started harvesting people instead of corn or something like that. But I think that's a very different visual identity. It's a very different concept than the idea of this... because, like, the thing that's scary about scarecrows, like, from a conceptual horror level, at least to me, is that a scarecrow is a puppet of a man. Like, we make a puppet of a man who's supposed to look like the farmer who lives in the farmhouse to stand in a field and scare away the crows. That's literally what the thing is for, is to keep pests out of the fields. And so the idea of Fiddlesticks... he has an old story. Did I talk about this in this take? I can't remember. He has an old story about him in his lore where he stands in the middle of a field, and anyone who crosses his field, he hunts them down and kills them because they tread on his corn, they tread on his land, which is a really good execution of the idea of taking the idea of a scarecrow that kills people. Why would a scarecrow kill people? Well, because they threaten his harvest. They threaten the corn that he's supposed to protect. That's really solid to me, and that's kind of hard to do with this mechanical thing going on. Now, I really like the idea of Fiddlesticks having this cage inside him where the crows all are, and for his ultimate, he lets all the crows out, and they fly around and tear everything to pieces. That's really cool. That's a really cool idea, but I really prefer Fiddlesticks as this haunted, twisted mockery of a human form that was put together by farmers in an attempt to protect their harvest, and then that sort of spirit, the spirit of that idea of protecting the harvest, then going insane, going dark, and killing literally everything and everyone that might threaten his harvest, that might threaten his field, right? Because then there's also that sense of rules, which is something that's so common to, like, folklore demons and monsters, is that there's a set of rules, and you have to obey this set of rules to avoid being horribly murdered. Like, for instance, you can see this in fairy tales, like Little Red Riding Hood, don't stray from the path because then you'll run into the big bad wolf and he'll eat you, or the Three Little Pigs, like, you have to put in the work, you have to build your house properly out of blah blah, otherwise if you're lazy you're gonna get eaten. Like, there's always this moralistic dimension, and so Fiddlesticks would be an embodiment of the rule of don't step on the grass, basically. Like don't go into the corn, don't threaten the harvest, don't step on the corn. This is important, we need it to live. And if you don't respect the rule of not stepping on the harvest, well, Fiddlesticks might get you in the night, children. The boogeyman might come. That, to me, is really interesting. And so I'm a little annoyed that this Fiddlesticks seems to be heading in such a mechanical, kind of quasi-robotic direction. Because I like the quiet horror of Fiddlesticks more. Like, I like the quiet horror of this completely otherwise innocuous-looking scarecrow that's not really that terrifying to look at when it's just standing still, but once it starts moving, you can see the seams kind of split open, and like this right here, the eyes inside the sackcloth. That's a really cool visual element that I'd really like, because when he's standing still, his sackcloth is intact, you can't see anything, but once he starts moving, the sackcloth starts splitting apart and you can see the eyes coming out. Like, that to me would be a really strong visual direction for him. Anyway, all of this was to say that I have a bit of concern with this visual direction for Fiddlesticks, because I really want him to be just made of wood and straw and become horrifying, not because he's got metal spikes and sawtooth blades and all this sort of horror visual imagery, but become horrifying because he's doing something that is supposed to not be possible. Like, because he's a wrong thing, a thing that's come to life that shouldn't be. The writing of Fiddlesticks, I feel a lot better about, because it's being handled by Jared Rosen. Now, Jared Rosen is a writer at Riot who I know a little bit, like not close friends, or but I know him a little bit, and I know some of his work, and he's really fucking good at horror. Like, he's really good at making this scary shit work. So I'm perfectly happy with him, and he seems to be agreeing with me a little bit here. There's that name, Fiddlesticks, and Necromancer probably wouldn't call their bloodthirsty new creation Fiddlesticks, nor would a warlock read from the grimoire of Dreadlord Fiddle in the Middle. Fiddlesticks is a name a child would coin, something you might invoke around a campfire to scare your friends, right? So he seems to be going along the same direction that I am, that Fiddlesticks is this fairy tale monster that children tell nursery rhymes about, that sort of inspires kids' nightmares at night, that comes for people who break the rules, who do the wrong thing. And that seems to me to be interesting. When we look at truly ancient champions like Ornna Kench, they have hundreds or even thousands of origin stories and tales surrounding them, with dozens of names depending on the individuals or cultures that came into contact with them over the centuries. Fiddlesticks could easily fit in among them, right? And I like that idea a lot. I like that more. Like, the thing I don't want them to do, lore-wise, is categorize him. I really don't want Fiddlesticks to be, oh, he's a demon like Evelyn or like Nocturne. I don't want him to be that. I want him to be this thing that can't be explained. Like, he's not a ghost, he's not from the Shadow Isles, he's not undead, he's not a demon, he's not a Darkin, he's not a god or anything. He's just this thing that lurks in the fields of not Lordran, that's something else. I've been playing a lot of Dark Souls recently. Runeterra, that's what the world is called. Who just lurks in the fields of Runeterra. Who's just there, and you'll walk past him and you won't even know until you hear an awful twisting sound behind you, and you look back and you see this scarecrow turning to face you, and a scythe coming out of nowhere, and you know that it's too late, that you have stepped on Fiddlesticks' ground, right? You know, that kind of thing is more frightening. There's the question of what Fiddle could sound like. As an utterly inhuman entity regardless of his true origins, Fiddle lacks internal organs, a brain to think, or vocal cords to form sentences. Any type of voice it might have wouldn't sound like a person, but rather a projection. Just as a scarecrow is the crude facsimile of a human being, its voice could be a crude mimicry of people it has come across or killed. I did float the idea of having 5 separate voice actors all whispering at once, repeating odd overlapping phrases as though Fiddle was trying to appear human at a distance and a terrifying monster up close. That's a gameplay idea that they couldn't quite make fit, but I really like that as a direction. Like, I really like that, as Fiddlesticks is not, you can't explain him. There's no sense or classification. You can't put him in a book. You don't know what he is. You just know that he is there and he's coming for you. I really like that as a direction. So, let's move on to Volibear, a champion who I also, you will be unsurprised to learn, have very strong opinions about how he should look and how he should play. As you may know, I have fallen very much in love with Volibear's updated lore state. Specifically, a story was called Silence for the Damned, I think it's called, featuring Sejuani and Udyr teaming up with Volibear's tribe, the Ursine, in order to destroy Sejuani's enemies. And in that particular story, Volibear is portrayed not as this grand, majestic war bear in armor, but as this eldritch, creeping, horrifying body horror thing, like this just awful, awful creature with too many eyes. That's kind of this ball of lightning that's barely being held together with flesh that's dripping blood and oozing dark fluids, like really just awful, horrifying thing. This ancient elder god kind of creature. Not Lovecraftian as such, because Lovecraft is more cosmic horror, but more like sort of pagan horrors, like this ancient, terrifying entity that existed before human beings came to be here, and which only tolerates humans because they bring them sacrifices, that kind of thing. And that's something that I'm really hoping that they're gonna push into that. In terms of gameplay, they're going with Volibear as unstoppable. Like, they really want to make the feeling that once Volibear gets going, you can't stop him. You can run away, or you can fight, but you can't make him stop coming at you, which I think is a really... Narratively, that's an interesting idea of Volibear as an unstoppable force, which kind of steps on Malphite's toes a little bit. But, you know, it's a good and interesting idea, and Malphite could use himself a different identity anyway. And also, he's a lightning character, right? So there's that, and that's an interesting tension to work with, the tension between him as like a physical thing on the field, like a bear that's coming at you, that's moving, that's powerful, and then the idea of lightning, which is very much connected with speed, like your greased lightning, your fastest lightning, that kind of thing, where Volibear can't really be that. Like, he can't be instant. Like, he can't be like a lightning bolt that, like, strikes and all of a sudden, before you even have time to think. He has to be a thing that's kind of moving towards you unstoppably. And that's a really interesting tension that I'm curious how they're gonna kind of blend that. Like, if Volibear is gonna have any part of his character design that really takes advantage of lightning as speed, or if it's gonna be all about lightning as area of effect. But, you know, I'm not a gameplay guy. No one comes here for my gameplay insights because I don't really have any. So let's talk about his visual design. And here we get a whole spanking new bunch of concept art of Volibear, which I just think is absolutely lovely. Now, this is the concept art of Volibear that we had already seen, more or less. I think there was a few more concepts floating around. And you can kind of see how those have been iterated upon a little bit more into the current state of exploration for Volibear. The thing for me that's kind of missing is this idea of this ancient, you know, pagan god from the high north worshipped by some distant, terrifying tribe of berserker people. Like that, I would really like more of what's described in the story, which is that the people under his rule, under his command, the people of his tribe are these mutants that are kind of trapped between multiple forms of human and animal, and they have like there's a lot of imagery of like parched out skulls sitting on top. You can kind of see that with this particular version right here. You can see this kind of skull sitting on top of his body, which is a really potent visual idea that I'd really like them to lean into the skull as an idea, because that ties really well into the idea of a war god, in the sense that he crushes the skulls of his enemies, he kills people, symbol of death, that kind of thing. And I'd also like them to go away from the idea of the armored bear and more towards the idea of the fighting bear, right? Because there's a difference between the two, and I think that's very well exemplified in this particular character design, with all the swords and all like the you can tell this evidence of combat, evidence of him having survived, and evidence of him being impossible to kill, impossible to stop, right? People who have tried and failed to destroy him. And that, to me, naturally seem to tie together with the idea of Volibear as a lightning character, in the sense that the swords and the weapons that are stuck in him can be lightning rods. Like, they can be a conduit for his power kind of thing. Visually, to me, that seems to make sense. And that's something that you can kind of see the artists themselves, who is Riot Justin Albers, Riot Earp, let me get that name right, who's the concept artist who's been working on him. And this is a really interesting post, by the way. I'm not going to read it all out to you because I want you to go and read it for yourself, but this is a really lovely insight into the kinds of thinking that you have to do if you want to create good character design, where you have to really be willing to explore many different directions of the same concept. So things got a little dark at first. The bottom spread of Volibear went more Demon Bear, which is where I would want the character to go. For D, I was thinking it would be interesting if Volibear developed some sort of coarse, hardened armor on his head, forming the shape of his skull, and on his torso, I wanted to give him a primal, ancient look. He's wearing strips of bandages and ripped clothing as a way of breaking away or hulking out of his Freljordian parameters. That, to me, is a really strong direction. I would really love to see the game going with that. That might be a little extreme for the visual style of League. Like, it feels to me like Riot is a little bit fighting with themselves over where they want Volibear to go, where there's this pull of pulling him back towards original Volibear. Original Volibear was this noble warrior, right? He was this tribal leader who allies himself with Sejuani because he believes that strength is necessary to secure the future of the Ursun. He's noble, he's powerful, he's angry, and he's proud, like that kind of thing. Whereas the new version of Volibear is much more of a terrifying, dominating, conquering force. Less a person and more a concept made flesh, as it were. And I'd like them to push much more towards that latter one, but that's going to be disappointing to people who really love what Volibear used to be. And that's always the tension with updates, right? Where you can see with Fiddlesticks, I was complaining that the new direction of Fiddlesticks wasn't enough like the old one. And here, I've completely changed direction. I'm not like, no, screw the old direction. We're going to go for this new one. That's really cool. And that tension is really hard to navigate, and there aren't any right answers here. Which is something I kind of want to emphasize is my opinions of where the character design should go are not like objectively correct or anything. These are observations based on my preferences and biases that I'm trying to argue for. So, you know, take it with that, because sometimes in the comments I see people like, yeah, you're so right, your criticism is so true and they're so wrong. And it's like, no, that's not how criticism works. It's not about right and wrong. It's about different perspectives on the same idea. So yeah, and you can kind of see the tension where this is much more a demonic Volibear, right? And up here, we have much more the idea of the noble leader Volibear, where he's got much less of a demonic aspect. He's more animal than demon, and he's got much more of a sort of coherent form. Like here, you can kind of see how his anatomy is it's literally just all twisted up, right? You've got these weird bulges and this crown or mane of bone. Is that what it is? Bone that's kind of sticking out of him, which is really interesting, but it also makes him look very unbear-like. He really doesn't look much like a bear in either this or that particular concept. He looks more like a Hulk, really. Like he looks more like a person with some bear furs on. Whereas these concepts lean much more into him as an animal, right? Rather than demon, he's more of an animal character, more of a bear-like character, and that's where I really like this one. Specifically because it does a really good job of making Volibear look bear-like, which is something that's kind of missing from the other ones, and I can understand if they eventually decide to go much more in this direction. It's safer, and to me it's less interesting, but it's also, from a character design standpoint, this kind of direction is also more coherent with what Volibear is supposed to be, which is he's the spirit of the bear, in the same way that Orin is like this goat of the forge or whatever. He's the spirit of the war bear, where I can see the necessity of pulling back a little bit, of restraining yourself a little bit from all the monstrous, demonic horror aspect of the character into something that's more standard war god kind of territory. You can see he's got these braided manes that kind of imply a little bit more of a restrained nature, like he's literally tied up a little bit. So I can see both sides here, even though I'm really in love with the idea of Volibear as an Eldritch horror god. Anyway, Rayla Gelbuck Hyde is the narrative writer on this one, and one of my current challenges, she says, is figuring out how to bridge Volibear's personality as he appears in-game with Volibear as he appears in the stories of the universe. His current voice has a calm resonance that gives him a certain honorable dignity, but he's also a furious ancient god of the Freljord, and a literal bear who can overpower you in a fight with the wrath of a storm. In the lore, we've seen Volibear as a terrifying entity with many eyes, a monster whose back is studded with the swords of lesser men. People have tried to take down the beast and failed. But I suspect Volibear is not the type of warrior to run away from his foe and get stabbed in the back. He faces his enemies head-on with fearless instinct. I'm also exploring Volibear's relationship with nature and mankind. Does his power come from his human worshippers in the Twisted Ursine, or from nature himself? Perhaps he believes in the rewilding of mankind, that humans have become weaker and less true to themselves with the growth of civilization. I don't expect that he wants to destroy all of mankind, but perhaps he thinks men need to pay penance for their mistakes. I kind of like the idea of Volibear as largely indifferent to people. And to me, also, that would tie in better with the aspect of the bear, like the aspect of the animal, in that if you bring him food and sacrifices and you obey him and do stuff, fine, you can tag along, you can be there, I don't give a damn. But he doesn't really care about people as such. Like the idea that he doesn't give a shit about people. Like he'll eat someone sometimes because he's hungry. But he doesn't care. He doesn't care about humans' humanity. He only really sees them as, like, in the same way that a shark might see those little fish that attach to the underside of them with, like, suction cups. Not literally parasites, but just they're kind of there. Maybe they're useful. I'll just leave them be unless I decide to eat one. This indifference, to me, would be really cool. I would love to see Volibear as an indifferent character who just, like, he'll use humans if they're useful, and then he'll just discard them because he doesn't give a damn, because he's a bear, he's a solitary creature. That, to me, would be interesting. But in terms of what Gelbug is going for, she seems to be more interested in exploring Volibear as a god, right? As a god who draws power from his relationship with humans, who's partly defined by his relationship with humans, which is very true. Like I can see that angle, because gods tend to be something that we invent to personify concepts in the world. Like Volibear, Ornn is the god of the forge, right? And the legend is that Ornn gave forging technology to mankind or whatever, that he invented it for us, and we kind of adopted it from him, which is a story that humans tell themselves about how we came to be who we are. And I like the idea of exploring that as well. And for that, you would have to move away from the idea of indifference and then ask the question of, okay, so what does Volibear represent in human beings? And here Gelbug brings up a good point, that maybe Volibear represents the idea of the primal, the wild instinct, the animal aspect of humanity that's getting lost in a drive towards civilization. And the part of that would work really well is that makes him a natural ally of Sejuani, who's also resisting the civilizing, in big air quotes, of the Freljord that Ashe is trying to do. Like, Ashe is trying to build this grand society of people, like living together in peace and harmony based on cooperation and mutual respect and stuff like that, where Sejuani is much more hewing towards a culture of raiding and martial prowess and power and like dominance and survival of the fittest, that kind of thing, which makes her much more of a natural ally of Volibear and makes Volibear a natural enemy of Ashe, where Ashe would be much more likely to align herself with someone like Ornn, who again is concerned with crafting, with building things that will last, kind of thing. So there's some interesting thematic overlaps here that the lore is going to have to navigate, and I'm really curious to see how it's all going to shake out. Whew. Anyway, that's 30 minutes on the on the Volibear and Fiddlesticks updates. I hope you have enjoyed me returning to YouTube after the long 5-day holiday that I took. We're going to be getting into Pantheon next. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, hit the bell icon to get notified. I mean, I have to tell you to do these things. I don't really want to, but it works, so. If you want to support the channel more directly than just like, comment, subscribe, then there is a Patreon where you can sign up for a subscription of like $1 a month, and that can be very helpful to people like me, because like those dollars do help me pay my rent. And if you don't want to sign up for a monthly subscription, well, there is tip jars down in the description that you can use as well to give me a one-time tip to say, hey, you spent a whole lot of time rambling on about Volibear and Fiddlesticks. That's worth $1 or $3. You can have those. Please don't do that again. Then those are also options. And as I say at the end of my videos, to content creators online, $1, $2, $3 can be the same as thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of views on videos or web pages compared to what is paid for, like, ad views, right? So even if the small amounts feel small, they actually make a much more of a difference than you think. So whether it's me or whether it's someone else, like, no matter who it is, if there's a content creator online whose work you enjoy, whose work you want to support and you want to help them, that small donation really helps a lot. So consider donating to any content creators whose work you enjoy, because we don't want to rely on ad revenue. I promise you, none of us want to rely on ad revenue and sponsorships. We would much rather rely directly on our audience. Anyway, if you have not enjoyed this video, then there is a dislike button down below, and, you know, you can click it now, or, you know, I'm just saying, there's, I hear some rumors that they're doing a visual update for the dislike button, and once that comes out, it's going to get a new skin. And I don't know, maybe there's going to be some kind of bundle deal, so you can click the dislike button now, like if you want the old boring experience, sure, but you could also just wait, just not click it. Just don't click it. Just wait for the visual update to come out some eventually, like 2025. I don't know. Maybe it takes 10 years. Just wait for that and don't ever click a dislike button until then. And then you'll get the updated dislike button with all the cool features, because you didn't click the dislike button right now. Click the dislike button, please. I need to live. Maybe that was a little over dramatic. Thank you very much for watching.